Let's be honest. Underwear is one of those things you never think about until something goes wrong. Maybe the elastic gives up at the worst possible moment. Maybe you forget to pack an extra pair for a trip. Suddenly, this tiny piece of fabric becomes the most important thing in your life. But here's a strange question. Who was the first person to look at their clothes and think, you know what this outfit needs? Another outfit underneath it. It sounds ridiculous, but that's basically how underwear was invented. What's even stranger is that humans lived without it for most of our existence. Think about that. Humans crossed continents, survived ice ages, hunted giant animals, and built entire civilizations long before anyone owned a pair of underwear. For tens of thousands of years, people simply got dressed and got on with life. No briefs, no boxers, no fancy moisture-wicking fabric promising to change your life. Nothing. So what changed? Why did humans suddenly decide that certain parts of the body needed their own dedicated layer of clothing? Was it comfort? Was it hygiene? Or did somebody just wake up one morning and decide they'd had enough of chafing? As it turns out, the answer is far more interesting than you'd expect. Because the story of underwear isn't really about fashion. It's about problem solving. It's about how humans constantly find ways to make life a little easier, a little cleaner, and a little more comfortable. And the journey from animal skins to modern underwear tells us something surprisingly deep about who we are as a species. To understand why underwear exists, we first need to visit a world where it didn't. Imagine you're an early human living 50,000 years ago. Your biggest concerns are finding food, staying warm, and not becoming lunch for something larger than you. Fashion is not exactly a priority. The earliest clothing was incredibly simple. Animal hides, fur, and whatever materials people could find. These weren't carefully tailored outfits. They were survival tools. If a piece of animal skin kept you warm during winter, that was good enough. But while these early clothes solved one problem, they created another. They were rough, really rough. Imagine wrapping yourself in something that had recently belonged to a large, hairy animal and then walking for miles every day. Comfort wasn't exactly part of the design. Still, underwear didn't appear immediately. Because when your daily life involves avoiding starvation and predators, a little discomfort doesn't seem like a major issue. Humans are surprisingly good at tolerating inconvenience when they have bigger problems to worry about. But then things started to change. People settled down. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Clothing became more common and more complex. Suddenly, people weren't just wearing a single layer anymore. They were wearing multiple garments. And that's when the problems began to pile up. Clothes got dirty faster, sweat became an issue. Expensive fabrics wore out more quickly. The more advanced civilization became, the more obvious it was that something needed to separate the body from the outer layers of clothing. Nobody set out to invent underwear. Instead, civilization slowly created the perfect conditions for it. And once those conditions existed, the solution was surprisingly simple. Add one extra layer. The first true ancestors of modern underwear appeared thousands of years ago in ancient civilizations, especially Egypt. The Egyptians wore simple linen garments known as loincloths. They weren't glamorous, they weren't fashionable, but they worked. Linen was lightweight, breathable, and much easier to clean than heavier outer clothing. And that's where the real breakthrough happened. Most people assume underwear was invented for comfort, but comfort wasn't the main reason. The real reason was practicality. Imagine spending days or even weeks producing a single piece of clothing by hand. You wouldn't want that garment getting dirty too quickly. A washable layer underneath solved the problem beautifully. The body stayed separated from expensive outer garments. Clothes lasted longer. Cleaning became easier. Everybody won. The Romans later expanded on the idea. Soldiers wore garments beneath armor. Athletes wore supportive clothing during competitions. Workers used simple underlayers to make daily life more comfortable. Without realizing it, people had discovered one of the greatest principles in clothing design. Layers are powerful. A small piece of fabric can dramatically improve comfort, hygiene, and durability. What's fascinating is that no single inventor created underwear. There was no grand announcement, no genius standing on a stage presenting the world's first pair of briefs. Instead, countless people across different cultures slowly improved the idea over centuries. One person adjusted the design, another improved the material. Someone else made it easier to wear. Generation after generation, the concept evolved. And before long, underwear became something that many people couldn't imagine living without. But the biggest changes were still ahead. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Underwear didn't just change clothing, it changed society. For much of history, clean undergarments became a sign of wealth. The richer you were, the more often you could wash them or replace them. That might sound strange today, but in the past, cleanliness was a luxury. If your underclothes were fresh and clean, it signaled that you had resources, time, and status. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Factories transformed everything. Textiles became cheaper. Production became faster. Clothing became more accessible. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could own multiple pairs of underwear. Something that had once been relatively expensive became part of everyday life. And that's when underwear started influencing much more than comfort. It began shaping fashion, body image, social expectations. Entire industries emerged around garments that were never meant to be seen, which is honestly one of the funniest things about human beings. We created a massive global market focused on improving clothing hidden underneath other clothing. But perhaps the biggest change was psychological. Over time, underwear became associated with privacy and modesty. It stopped being just a practical garment. It became part of cultural identity. Different societies developed different expectations about what people should wear underneath their clothes. A simple piece of fabric had evolved into something much larger than its creators ever intended. And all of that happened because humans were trying to solve a surprisingly ordinary problem. Today, underwear feels so normal that it's almost invisible. You probably put it on this morning without giving it a second thought. And honestly, who spends their day thinking about the history of underwear? But maybe we should, because hidden inside this ordinary object is a powerful lesson about human progress. Most people imagine history as a series of huge breakthroughs, the invention of fire, the wheel, the internet. But many of the things that shape our lives aren't dramatic inventions. They're small improvements, tiny solutions to everyday annoyances, a softer fabric, a better design, an extra layer between the body and the world. Those little improvements don't seem important at first, but they add up. Over centuries, they quietly transform the way people live. The first people who wore primitive undergarments weren't trying to change civilization. They were simply solving a problem they faced that day. Maybe their clothes were uncomfortable. Maybe they wanted to keep expensive garments cleaner. Maybe they were just looking for a practical solution. Whatever the reason, their idea survived. And because it survived, it spread. Generation after generation, people refined it, improved it, and passed it along, until eventually it reached us. That's what makes human history so fascinating. The world we live in today wasn't built by a handful of famous inventors. It was built by millions of ordinary people making small improvements to everyday life. And underwear is a perfect example. So the next time you get dressed, remember this. You're not just putting on a piece of fabric. You're participating in a chain of human innovation that stretches back thousands of years. A chain built by people whose names we'll never know, but whose ideas are still with us every single day. And that's a surprisingly profound thing to discover about underwear.